discouraging a private business owner from lawfully operating in the way of their choosing. I myself have had the opportunity to work for companies such as ESPN and Georgia's own Cox Enterprises in my professional career. In order for us to be competitive in a rapidly evolving global economy, the only choice we have is to be pro-business and pro-worker. Early in my career, I myself was a member of a union, so I take a keen interest in the business-related legislation that is proposed in this chamber, and I feel obligated to take a critical, honest look at what this bill actually does. No spin, no games. And with that in mind, I'm quite confident in saying it seems like the position you've taken here with this bill directly contradicts your party's platform. You're supposed to value being a partner with individuals and industries, not a meddlesome monitor. Empowering the individual was supposed to be a fundamental aspect of your beliefs. Now you want to create a chilling effect on free speech on the shop floor. Understand that this bill tells people who want to live and work in Georgia that the majority party is not looking out for their interests, that they are willing to let government into business when it works for them. The only factors that should limit the success of a business are that of ingenuity, commitment to achieving goals, and the free market, plain and simple. Please don't misunderstand me. I am thrilled, proud even, that Georgia is the #1 state for business in the country, and we should all be rooting for economic prosperity. But we didn't need this bill in order to be ranked #1, and we don't need to compromise our values in order to keep our economy strong. So, as we consider this bill, I urge us instead to protect individual liberty, economic freedom, and the established legal framework that ensures fairness for all Georgians and businesses. Today, I'm voting yes to smaller government and no to SB 362, because we need to be pro-business and pro-worker to compete in an evolving global economy. And while the majority party may prevail on this bill, Democrats are taking freedom back today. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. I recognize Senator from the 36th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I stand before you in opposition to Senate Bill 362. You're hearing some of the same points from several other colleagues who've taken the well today or asked questions from their seat. Plain and simple, this Senate bill violates federal law. That is indisputable. Are you going to sit here and vote to pass a bill that violates federal law? I expect that that's what we will see. You should oppose this bill because it's preempted by federal labor law, which, as my colleague from the 14th pointed out, has been on the books since 1937. Voting for this bill means you're voting for expensive litigation that will cost the taxpayers money and that will ultimately fail. Have you promised the new EV plants that are coming into Georgia that you're going to make sure they don't have to have a union? Is that an underlying motive here that we're seeing emerge? Could it be that you would get in the back room and tell them that and then try to pass this bill? Well, we've seen bills like this before. The right-wing think tanks are always hard at work churning these out and putting them in the hands of legislators. And this bill has all the hallmarks of the ALEC crowd, whose name has been rightfully so tarnished for their performance. And it reminds me of some years ago in the House when an ALEC bill was introduced there to tell unions how to run their business. It's an interesting thing that happened on that bill. I'll share it with you. We had a committee hearing on it. It went to the floor immediately after it passed the committee, through the rules, and onto the floor of the House. That bill was defeated with a bipartisan vote in the House that was run by the GOP. And why was that? Because we had the head of the police union here in our community come down and testify and say, why are y'all telling me how to run my operation? I know the senator from the 29th knows something about this, having represented the police union in his fair county of Muskogee. And he forcefully made the case that, hey, leave us alone. Leave our organizations alone. Let us stand up with our union for our rights, for pay, for safe working conditions, for dignity on the job. Stay out of our business. And that bill was defeated in a bipartisan vote. I'll repeat, although I surely hope everybody knows this, it was unions that built a middle class in America. It was unions that built a middle class in America. It was unions that, you like the 5-day work week? Thank a union. You like an end to child labor? Thank a union. The list goes on and on. Social Security. The union was on the right side of fighting for policies in this nation to give the working class a chance at a successful life, being able to raise their families and have their sons and daughters achieve and succeed beyond their parents' wildest dreams. That's what the story of unionization is in this country. And in fact, the son of an IBEW representative can grow up to become a banker, as we've heard today from the senator from the 3rd. And that's part of, I don't know what's a better demonstration of the power of unions, where a person who didn't have a high school education in a good union job with protections and wages and contracts, they can raise their family to succeed beyond their wildest dreams. That's the story of unionization in this country. And to tackle this big job of overturning federal law that's been in place, as my colleague pointed out to you, almost 100 years, that's what we're here doing today. I'm awfully glad the cameras are on and Georgians across the state can see what the agenda is of the majority party. This is the agenda, as my colleague from the 39th pointed out very skillfully, who spoke just before me. Do you all know that in this country, 80% of the folks between 30 and 18, 80% support unions? That's pretty interesting. You know, that kind of sounds like the future. That kind of sounds like where we're going as a nation. That working people understand the need for organizations, unions, that represent them, give them a voice on the job, give them dignity on the job, give safe working conditions, and give the kind of pay and benefits that allow you to raise your family in comfort and security. That's what unions do. So Tell me again why you want to smash them. Tell me again why you want to create these barricades to unionization. My colleague from Fulton explained with her long history of union membership in an array of union locals here in the Atlanta area, the story of how people organize, and when you want to take away the right to not go to election, but instead use membership cards that represent a voluntary association with building a union, that's an effort to create a barrier for working people to have access to building a union. Period, paragraph. Not complicated, very simple. And so you want to spend taxpayer dollars to take this and fight it in the courts. And I say to you, if that's the path you choose, remember there's a consequence to it. You're exposing yourself and your party and your brand to the working people of Georgia for what it is, that the GOP is willing to do this. As a good friend of mine from the 3rd shared with me, and we both agree, after all of our conversation and our efforts to point out the lack of wisdom demonstrated by this bill, it's not likely that any votes will be changed in this chamber. People came in knowing how they were going to vote. There's a party line vote of the GOP to pass this bill. And we agree on that. We agree on that it's very likely that none of you will have an awakening today and say, you know what, I'm going to back up working people in my district. I'm going to stand with them. I'm not looking for that miracle to happen, but I am looking for the people of Georgia to understand that this is an effort to thwart your right to participate in building a union in your workplace. That's what this is. The people of Georgia, the next generation's coming up, unions are on the rise for the reason that huge, egregious practices by the corporate world inform them that they'd better get together and get organized and build them an organization to stand for them in the workplace. And the interesting fact is that the states that have the higher levels of unionization have a healthier population. They have better performance in schools. They have higher numbers of people going to college. They have an overall vibrant and healthy economy that Georgia doesn't measure up to. So all of these are lessons that could be learned if you came here with an open mind. I'll say to you, the public certainly knows this, and I believe it's in the 70% of people across the country, regardless of their party affiliation, believe we need to build unions and that people have a right to build a union and join a union and participate in a union. And in fact, these terms that we heard here thrown around about how the bullying and the intimidation and the threats and pushing people around, that's not union people that are doing that. That's people representing the employer. Those people are working at the will of the employer. So let's protect in Georgia the pathway to unionization. You know, that's why we have our auto industry, gold standard, UAW. We could go down the list of what unions have contributed. The record's long, the record is strong. I'm going to stand with them. My colleagues in my party are standing with them, and I would urge you, ladies and gentlemen of the majority party, to take a new look at this topic, at this issue. I will close my remarks. Pardon us for being somewhat repetitive, but the lessons are so long and strong we have to repeat them. And we know that the working people across Georgia are listening and will have a chance to cast their votes on which party is going to stand up for their right to have a voice on the job. I will stand for any questions, and if there are no questions, I will leave the well.
You do have a couple questions, Senator.
I do have a
Re-
question.
Yes, ma'am. Senator from the 42nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the senator yield?
I yield to the senator from the 42nd.
Thank you. Earlier, I heard this measure characterized as a sort of benevolent measure to help employees by keeping their information private. What is your take on that?
It's part of a federal labor law that employers provide that information. So, again, almost 100 years of legal precedence. That's an effort to create a barrier for union organizing to go on in the workplace. That's what that's about. That's what it's styled for, and it's in violation of the federal labor law.
Yeah, thank you. Will you further yield?
I do. I yield.
It would seem to me, and wouldn't you agree, that if this were a benevolent measure that was helpful to employees, that we would have some employee or employee organization support? Are you aware of any organizations that advocate on behalf of employees supporting this measure?
Senator, thank you for that question, and you raise a great point. No, I see no support from the organizations that represent working people for supporting this measure. In fact, we're hearing from all parts of Georgia. I am in my message, the phone calls and the emails that are coming to my office. Don't pass this bill. This bill violates federal law. This is a backward step for Georgia. That's the feedback I hear from the folks that represent working people in this state.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. If there are no further questions.
You have one more question,
All
Senator.
right, thank you.
Recognize Senator from the 27th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield,
I yield.
you mentioned something I want to clarify and make sure I understand it correctly. I believe you said that you think that unions are on the rise and they're the future. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And if I have brought all my data points to the well with me, I can demonstrate that. Georgia's union membership has been rising every year for the last 5 years, the percentage of the workforce that are union.
Do you further yield?
I yield.
There's an article from Politico that I'm reading here from last January. It says that union membership hit an all-time low in 2022 despite a surge in organizing efforts that emerged during the pandemic. The percentage of U.S. workers who belong to a union dropped from 10.3% to 10.1%. So, in other words, 90% of Americans are not a member of a labor union. And this 10% number, at least according to Politico, represents an all-time low. And I'm just curious how that aligns with your assertion that they're on the rise when this says it's an all-time low.
First of all, I don't know your source. Haven't read it, haven't seen the data, don't know who wrote that, don't know where they sourced their figures from. That's number one. I know the figures that I have seen indicate a rise. I will also refer you back to the senator from Fulton who gave her account of when she worked as an air traffic controller. She and her husband, along with I think 32,000 air traffic controllers, were peremptorily fired by President Reagan. So there's been an unprecedented attack on labor unions over the last 40 years, since the 80s, a determined battle to crush labor. That's what's gone on. So when you talk about decline in union membership, it's happened in a climate that's been imposed by an agenda to decimate unions, and that's worked. But in Georgia, and I will share my statistics with you that I have on my desk, the percentage has gone up consistently for the last 5 years of labor, organized labor members in this state. And across the country, the folks in the fast food industry that flip the hamburgers, make the milkshakes, they were deemed by conventional wisdom that those people are unorganizable. You can't organize them. They move from job to job. They're low paid. They're unorganizable. Well, I'll refer to you the Fight for 15, which became a national slogan, and probably everybody in here has heard of that, the Fight for 15. And in establishment after establishment in the fast food industry, workers have organized. Workers have struck. Workers have signed cards. Workers have spoken up. There's a South-wide coalition of the Southern workforce in that industry, and that's a massive growth in that industry. Starbucks, my goodness, Starbucks is being organized. Another sector of that industry that was supposed to be unorganizable. And you know, if you go back in labor history, the AFL and the CIO was the Congress of Industrial Organizations. The AFL was the trades. And there was legendary talk back then about you'll never organize that crowd, the CIO. Well, things did get organized, and we had the AFL and the CIO merge, and we had massive growth in unions. And the unions battled for policy for everybody's benefit, not just a union member's benefit. They battled for public policy. For example, saving Social Security is part of the agenda of the labor unions. So they stand on the side of the vast masses and numbers of working families in this country. And they've stood against the hollowing out of the middle class that's been part of this dynamic that's attempted to crush unions. And we have, the greatest wealth disparity in this country since the Gilded Age of massively obscene salaries for the top executives and leaders of corporations, alongside stripping people of their pensions. So, yeah, we're in an ongoing effort in this country to bring some power to the untold millions of laboring people so that they have a chance to have a secure life, security on the job protection, wages, and be able to raise their children to have better lives. That's right. There was an effort to crush unions. They've made huge inroads in crushing unions, and I see the clock is now turning back the other way.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. Recognize Senator from the 5th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm here to get down to the basic facts of Senate Bill 362, because sometimes the language of legislation gets a little murky. So let's clear it up. SB 362 would prohibit any businesses that receive state money from voluntarily recognizing a union, even when that union has majority support in their workplace. First of all, this violates the federal labor law. That alone should have you voting no on this one. If violating federal law isn't enough reason, let's consider the kind of businesses this bill would keep in Georgia. This country was built with labor union. Union contracts allow workers to fight for good wages, benefits, and safe working conditions. Union jobs give people a path to the middle class. And attracting quality, happy workers is a win for employers. Senate Bill 362 would tie the hands of businesses that might want to come to Georgia, and it really put our best place to do business title in jeopardy. what kind of business would come to Georgia? The kind of businesses that don't mind violating federal law and having an unhappy workforce? Because good businesses will go to states that do not condition economic development support on how a business chooses to manage their own labor relations. Georgia is already home to phenomenal businesses and known as a welcoming, business-friendly base. A bill like this says that we don't trust business owner to do what's best for their own workforce. It says politicians should make the choices for everyone, and it is not good for attracting quality businesses with happy workforce. Mr. President, I yield the word. Thank you.
Recognize the senator from the 31st.
Good afternoon, colleagues. So I have a few comments. I want to also clear up a few misconceptions that are out there, but to kind of bring us back full circle, I think, to where the senator from the 3rd started, under this bill, you can still unionize. So I think our friends from across the aisle have totally forgot that with whoever's writing their speeches. But I'm just being honest. The other part of about this, too, is that a lot of the stories, and, you know, my dad, some of you all know this, I mean, he grew up during the Depression. You know, he served in foreign wars in the 60s and the 70s, stationed in the 50s. A lot of the stories about unionization and things that we're hearing today are stories of yesterday. Sounds like, you know, the big union bosses that don't want us intruding on their territory and not concerned about workers. And I think we're having this national conversation right now in Congress. But I think we all know that Congress can't get anything done, so that's another topic for a different day. But, you know, many blue-collar workers go to work to earn a living and provide for their families. Workers, in some cases, are tired of, you know, companies and even company policies shoving stuff down their throat versus having a discussion about benefits, flexibility, and things that, you know, impact them. Because of big union bosses, and I think we're feeling this environment happening in this room right now, have failed employees because of corruption, politics, and guess what? Membership dues. Labor unions of today have placed workers in an impossible situation. Many want a voice, but they're being told that, guess what? You got to join a union if you want your voice to be heard. I think some of our colleagues from the minority party have also reminded us that this system has not been revised since the Great Depression. I think we all know what year the Depression started, 1929, so the 30s, part of the 40s. This is 2024. Democrats want to hold workers, you know, hold them to the standards of the bosses because they believe that those federal laws are so great back then that they're protecting workers now. States have the right to challenge the federal government. So we want to sit here and we want to talk about, you know, we're worried about lawsuits, we're worried about a lot of other things, but, you know, the minority party, they'll go stand up and create organizations like Fair Fight and others to challenge all the laws that we pass here as a majority party. Is that not true? We want to talk about empowering workers, then we should protect choice and privacy. We want to talk about the economy. We want to talk about the EV industry. The largest EV company in the world refuses to create a union. That wasn't done behind closed doors. That was done in public. They left Michigan for Texas. So at the end of the day, the minority party wants to ask themselves, should ask themselves, why is union membership at its lowest levels, as the senator from the 27th said, since the 1960s? Why do only 35% of potential union members want to vote yes to organizing? Another 32% would confidently vote no. So as my friend from Atlanta, the senator from the 39th, invokes the word freedom, you're right. Workers do want freedom, but they're not going to be held down by the union bosses. Mr. President, I yield the will.
Recognize the senator from the 10th.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members of this body. I want to remind our previous speaker that I write my own speeches, and so do many in our party. What we are talking about here is Senate Bill 362. I believe that's the number. And you don't need a speechwriter to get up here and talk about legislation that many of us in here that have worked with unions, has been involved in corporations, understand the importance of having that symbiotic relationship between a business and its employees. Folks, unions are critical to the success of not just the middle class. Unions are critical to the success of this great state. I represent a company that's 120 years old. That company, over its history, has evolved. That company, Ford Motor Company, continues to evolve today. And yes, Ford has a strong relationship with its unions, a relationship that's been in place for many, many years, that many have already said that's allowed many of its employees to rise up out of poverty into the middle and even in the upper classes of what we call in our society. But what I want to talk about today is this bill. This bill, plain and simple, you can say it's about unions, you can say it's about this or that. This is nothing more than a money bill where the state of Georgia gets to determine who gets the money. What restrictions is the state of Georgia placing on other companies out there as it pertains to economic incentives that are similar in nature to what we see in this legislation? What other companies are there? We talk all the time, and it's been said many, many times, that Georgia is the #1 place in the state to do business, the #1 place in the country to do business. Well, I suggest to you that this bill is going to make it much more difficult for companies to make decisions. A company like Ford Motor Company that's evolved over the years, that has foreign companies that they are in partnership with, whose laws in their countries are different than the laws here in the United States. One example is just the SK Battery plant up in Commerce, Georgia. That plant is partially owned by Ford, it's partially owned by the Koreans. I visited and toured that plant. They build batteries for Volkswagen on one side, they build batteries for Ford motor vehicles, i.e. the Lightning truck, on the other side of the plant. Think about this relationship that was highly incentivized by this state to build, and they're trying to attract other partnerships as well. Think about the impact that this bill is going to have on those relationships, being able not just to grow but to prosper in our great state. When I walked through that plant, most of the employees in there were of Korean descent. They were. But what we're doing now is saying to those companies, to their employees, that they bring from their country over here, if you're going to qualify for these incentives, then you essentially going to have some difficulties if your employees want to unionize. That's what we're saying to them. On the other side of the plant, where the batteries are being built by Americans, there are already union members. Think about how that relationship, and this is just an example of what the future is going to look like, folks. We're going to see these partnerships continue to flourish as the economy becomes much more global in sourcing parts and raw material, and even employees. That's why I'm here opposing this bill. I tried to ask the senator from the 3rd about that particular question. How do you deal with situations like that? He said in the response from the senator from the 3rd, well, they have to put it in an MOU. MOUs do not circumvent state laws, federal laws, or even foreign laws in other countries. Somebody tell me how that MOU could do that, which is some kind of memorandum of understanding of which can be easily changed. Some can come up with an MOU, take advantage of the economic incentives, and then that MOU changes. Do we now go back, as this bill states, and pull that money back? Georgia wants the power to do that. How can that be an incentive for companies like Ford, like the Koreans, and others in this state to form these partnerships, knowing that potentially this state could go back and snatch back millions of dollars in economic incentives? That's why I say this is a money bill. I don't think there's anyone in this chamber that's more pro-business, pro-employee than I am. I've had my business, thankfully, for 31 years. But what we are telling foreign companies now is that you got to comply with Georgia's law, not their law in their country. That's what we're telling them, if you want to keep these incentives. To me, this bill becomes a disincentive for companies to do business in Georgia. As this industry, and I'm talking about this EV industry, automobile industry, or any other industry evolves and the cost of building these mega plants continue to grow, you're going to see more partnerships like this battery plant up in Commerce. I would hope that this body would think seriously. And I would even hope that our governor would go back and revisit this initiative, because I don't believe the governor intended for this legislation to have these consequences in it that potentially could hurt Georgia's status as the #1 place. I don't believe the governor intended that. Folks, legislators, those that are watching, there are some serious, serious flaws in this legislation. And as we say in my business, I would certainly hope that we will pump the brakes on it. Thank you, and I yield the well.
Senator from the 50th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of Senate Bill 362 and to address some concerns that I've heard in the well. I've heard repeatedly that this bill violates federal law and is preempted. Let me walk you through that for a second. In 2010, in the state of Arizona, there was a ballot initiative that was put on the ballot that people voted on. And the language said the right to vote by secret ballot for employee representation is fundamental and shall be guaranteed where local, state, or federal law permits or requires elections, designations, or authorizations for employee representation. And it passed, and it was challenged. And a federal judge said, you know what? No, that can stay. That is not preempted by federal law. And let me tell you what that did in Arizona. In Arizona, that required a secret ballot. What does this do? This just says after January 1, 2025, if you're going to get an economic incentive from the state of Georgia, you have to allow individuals to cast a secret ballot. It is not a requirement. So a federal judge already says that making it a requirement isn't preempted by federal law. How is doing less than that going to be preempted? That's a disingenuous argument. This will not be preempted by federal law and is not. Second, while I believe that the intention was pure with the red bandanas, and I did a little reading on this group of coal miners, and they were fighting for the right to unionize. And they lived in towns that were owned by the mines. And if people found out that they were trying to unionize, they didn't just lose their job, they got evicted. So if you're in that situation, don't you think it would be appropriate and important to be able to cast a secret ballot so you don't risk losing your home? This is a good bill for people. I've heard a lot of people talk about protecting the unions. How about the people of Georgia? Why is it such a bad policy to say, you know what? If you're in the state of Georgia, you have a right to be protected. You have a right to choose whether or not to unionize, and you're not going to get bullied. And you're not going to get blackmailed. A secret ballot. It's a voting method used for elections in which a voter's identity remains anonymous. Mr. President, I will yield the well, and I ask for favorable consideration on Senate Bill 362. Thank you.
Recognize the senator from the 44th. Senator, you're on deck.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just wanted to say a couple of things about this issue. And I rise today to make sure that everyone understands that I will always support working people and labor. My great uncles were Pullman porters on the railroad during segregation, so I love labor. I've been a member of 2 unions and do not believe in busting up the unions nor crushing unions. During the times when we were trying to get the Martin Luther King holiday, Dr. King's birthday, we would march down Peachtree Street to Auburn Avenue to the rally. I would try to jump in line with the Teamsters because it gave me energy and rejuvenated me to fight more for equity for working people. Now when I talk to students during Black History Month, I talk about the great labor leader and my most celebrated labor leader, A. Philip Randolph, and his fight for labor and for working people, who also organized the 1963 March on Washington and also worked about 10 years to try to get a union for sleeping cars. So much sacrifice has been done. And he brought a lot to the African American community by organizing that union. So labor and unions provide good pay and good benefits and safe working conditions. As a Georgia state senator, please know that I stand today with labor, and I will always stand with labor and stand with working people. I will fight for working people to have their voices heard. This is a bad bill for working people of Georgia. Mr. President, I yield the well.
Senator from 37th.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, I know the hour wanes on, and this is an issue we probably need to vote on here soon, but I do want to challenge some of the things we've heard today. If you're a worker of Georgia, I want you to know that this Senate, people in both parties, certainly myself as a representative of the majority party here, recognizes this, as was said earlier by the lady from the 36, that the impact of labor unions in building a great work environment in our nation, our nation's laws, cannot be overstated. Child labor laws, OSHA, workforce safety, Social Security, 40-hour work week, all these things were powerful impacts that labor unions had in helping build the nation and the working conditions we have today as a nation. But the premise that a secret vote for unionization in a subset of cases undermines that is just a false set of assumptions. Mr. President, my first job was delivering newspapers. I was 3 months before my 11th birthday. I delivered newspapers in a mill village. And after doing that for 5 years, was really excited to get a job working in a union grocery store making $3.65 an hour. That was more than minimum wage. I was glad to get 30 cents above minimum wage at the time. And I worked that until I got another job as a janitor and a dishwasher in a Meals on Wheels site. My heart is with regular folks, and the district I represent in North Cobb County is not the elites, but it's a lot more of the cable guy and the working folks than it is the elites that run, the captains of industry that run these global businesses. That's who I'm here to represent, and that's who I'm speaking to today. The workplace is a deeply personal place. Working 50 hours a week, shoulder to shoulder with people, takes teamwork, takes trust, and takes an environment where you oftentimes lay your life in the hands of another person who you trust, in working in an elevated environment, a construction environment where if people don't work together as teams and can't trust each other, your very life sometimes can be in jeopardy as a worker. Most folks who work 40, 50-hour-a-week jobs spend more time with their coworkers than they do with their family members. They do it not because it's their recreation or just their what they do for pleasure. They do it to put food on their table. They do it because they like food with their meals, right? Keeping it simple. And they work in an environment where emotional peace and getting along as a team deeply matters. If you're with workers that are around you that are against you constantly, even if it's just a social thing, you're being picked at and talked about and excluded, just 40 to 50 hours a week in that environment is poison. The workplace matters deeply. I say this because the party I represent, the Republican Party, has been called out as somehow bringing a union-busting bill. They're saying this is about big business versus workers. I reject that premise, which you've heard today from this well, that suggests this is big business versus the good of labor unions is false. This bill does not protect big business. This bill protects the right of conscience. The right of conscience for a person to work shoulder to shoulder with somebody, many cases in a life-threatening circumstance, if they work with their hands and they work in an dangerous environment, they're shoulder to shoulder, hand to hand with other people in their work environment with whom they have to have trust and cannot have dissension sowed among the ranks. Rights of conscience, which are protected by secret ballots, are essential in a workplace where people depend on each other and where they spend 40 to 50 hours a week. Mr. President, secret ballot, as we said before, of course happens in our election system. Nobody in this chamber would suggest that a voter should have to go to the polls and disclose who they're voting for. No, we as senators and representatives disclose who we're voting for on the board because we're working for the people and are accountable to the people. But we're really the only ones that vote in public because the ballot, the anonymity of the ballot is essential liberty. But it's not just in our civil elections where that's the case. I voted in a church council election 2 weeks ago on a Sunday for our parish council. And it dawned on me as I was listening to one of our members speak earlier, I cast 2 votes. We have 2 votes as members. And I cast a vote in our church council election 2 weeks ago for a union electrician, a member of the IBEW right here in Georgia, and the wife of a union sheet metal worker by secret ballot. Even in a church city council election, we vote by secret ballot. And what's fascinating to me, and I don't want to get personal with folks here, and I won't call any names. This is just in the course of spirited debate. But ladies and gentlemen of Georgia, the party that opposes this bill, that's talking again and again and again about how my party doesn't care about workers, ask them how they vote among themselves. This body, the Senate Democrat caucus, when you guys elect your own leaders to represent you in this chamber amongst each other, it's a very sensitive work environment. You guys have to work with each other. You guys have to work as a team. We have to work shoulder to shoulder with each other. If a leadership election for the minority leader, minority whip, could rip your caucus apart in ways that's very uncomfortable. You have to work with each other no matter what comes out of the backside of that. So this minority caucus in the Senate, when they vote amongst each other for the leadership that represents them in this chamber, they vote by secret ballot. In fact, not only does the minority party who opposes secret ballot for union workers, working shoulder to shoulder in a sensitive environment with their peers with whom they have to work in peace with, not only does the minority caucus vote themselves by secret ballot, all the folks opposing this bill. But if you will reflect, Mr. President, on nowhere other than the Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act of 1959, it's a bill that was, in fact, I pulled this right off of the Biden administration's Department of Labor website. The process by electing officers, the officers that run labor unions themselves, when labor unions conduct their own elections for who will lead them, law requires, and it says it right here, all officers of local unions must be elected by secret ballot among the members in good standing. All officers of national or international unions or of intermediate bodies must be elected either directly by secret ballot among members or indirectly through representatives who themselves are elected by secret ballot. When you're working shoulder to shoulder with people in an environment that matters, whether it's running a labor union itself, or whether it's operating shoulder to shoulder in a dangerous workplace, having peace among those among us matters. And to maintain that peace, secret ballot to preserve right of conscience is vitally important. I stand here in support of the good that labor unions do. I have many labor union members in my community, and as I shared a moment before, many are close friends of mine. I reject the premise this is a union-busting bill, but Mr. President, this is a bill that preserves the right of conscience for folks to be able to vote by secret ballot on things that really matter. With that, Mr. President, I yield the will.
Recognize the senator has yielded. Recognize the senator from the 18th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm not going to tarry too long. I know we've been debating this bill for a long time, but really just 2 points I wanted to make. The first, and it was really eloquently covered by the senator from the 50th, with regard to these legal principle arguments that have been suggested to you, such as federal preemption, the supremacy clause, other arguments that somehow the courts are just going to reject this out of hand and we're going to have nothing but a bunch of wasted taxpayer dollars because of this bill having been passed. But there's a reason that the minority party has been very vague in the way they've described these potential challenges and have offered you zero precedent from any jurisdiction as to any court that has accepted the arguments that are being made. But what I was going to tell you about, but the senator from the 50th did a good job, that embedded in this argument they're making is that somehow this is an edgy law. This is something really weird that we're doing that nobody else has done. But in fact, there are multiple states that have passed the very same measure that we're talking about here, and the only challenge of which I'm aware of was where the NLRB challenged it in federal court on the very arguments you're hearing from the minority party and lost. The federal court rejected the arguments that you're hearing. So that's not a reason not to do it. So the only other real reason is somehow we've talked about secret ballots in a way that I would have never envisioned possible in this chamber. With apologies to the producers of Seinfeld, but I hope some of y'all maybe are fans of the Seinfeld series. There's one where they enter the bizarro world. The bizarro world in Seinfeld, where everything is backwards. Right is left, up is down. The math doesn't work out. It's a world, but everything's backwards. It just doesn't make sense to compare to what is normally common sense. And I kind of feel like we've drifted over into bizarro world. Somehow secret ballots have been demonized. Have been demonized by the minority party here. In fact, the senator from the 14th this morning said, my gosh, we can't go into that, quote, painful secret ballot process, close quote. Painful secret ballot process. Now, what's so bizarre about this is, notwithstanding all the issues that we talk about, we have, of course, over the last few years, talked a lot about election laws, haven't we? And embedded in our process, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on or where you are on those legislative measures, no one has ever said, let's do away with secret ballots. Why? Because there's value in being able to cast a secret ballot so that, fill in the blank, there's 100 different reasons we can all think of. But in Georgia, like many other states, it is so important and so valued. It's not just in our statutes, y'all. It's in our Constitution. Secret ballots are that important because people ought to be able to vote their conscience without fear of retribution, without fear of losing their property, without fearing their safety, without fear of losing their job. And all of that applies to this same process. But somehow we've demonized, the minority party has demonized secret ballots. So I am proud to stand here, as my colleagues have, and stand up for the workers of the state of Georgia who want to express their vote without the fear of retribution from colleagues. That it can express their vote and vote the way they really want to vote without fear of being isolated by their coworkers. So that's what this bill does, and requires the secret ballot and preserves that. Lastly, I'll just say I'm grateful to Governor Kemp, who not only is making sure that we're being smart with our tax incentives, that is the tax dollars that we have, but also making sure that Georgia is a competitive place in which to do business, that we can attract other businesses to come to Georgia and protect the right of the employees that will work the jobs that we want to be in this state so desperately. So it's a good bill. It's a common sense bill. It's a common sense measure. And I thank our governor for leading on this in a thoughtful way. With that, Mr. President, I'll yield the well.
The senator has yielded. Does any other senator wish to rise on this issue? Is there any senator that has not risen on this issue? Chair hears none. Senator, would you like to close debate? Oh, I'm sorry. We've got the minority report. Secretary, read the minority report, and then, I'm sorry, Senator from the 9th. Well, it's been read. I recognize Senator from the 9th. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. President. Been a long day, right? Hey, contentious bills take up time. Stop maybe putting contentious bills in, because you know we have to speak for our district as well, and we have to discuss ideologies. That's what we do here, and we came here to work, right? That's why we're here. We came here to work. Anyway, so of course the minority disagrees with the committee's recommendation of do not pass. In essence, Senate Bill 362 prohibits any business from receiving state funding from voluntarily recognizing a union, even if that union has demonstrated minority support among workers and is supported by the employer. I come to you all today as a member of the union. I am a proud member of CWA Local 3204. I served in that union during my career in telecommunications. I'm not going to say the company because I might have to talk about big business. But during my time, I really appreciated my union. There was a time when I was a single mom, and it was because my union allowed me to a fair wage. I got paid very well under my union contract. I got great benefits to take care of my children under my union contract. And when I was downsized from my company, it was my union contract that kept me on payroll for an additional 2 years. And then I ran for office. So there is value in being in a union. I have proudly been in my union. We stand in solidarity in my union, as many of my colleagues here today are in solidarity today. And that means something, to be in solidarity. We have to hold together to get our rights, to get things done. That's the power of a union. And I wanted to dispel some of the misinformation I've heard about unions, because I've been in my union. I was still in it, 23 years, served in my union. So I think I know a little bit about how unions are run and how voluntary authorization runs and who gets intimidated. In my time in my union, and I think we've been on strike once, not once did a union member intimidate me. You know who did, though? Big money employer did. Intimidation, retaliation, times when I had to take off from my children. They wanted to start a little letter chain on me, and my union was there to protect me from retaliation. So I don't know about the retaliation, but I do know that when people do try to unionize, it's not the unions that are intimidating workers, folks. It's the companies. They call them union busting companies. Happens all the time. Go ask the Apple store employees if you don't believe me. As the bill sponsor admitted during the committee, SB 362 is preempted by federal law because it prohibits businesses from voluntarily recognizing a labor union, an action that is protected by the National Labor Relations Act. And since we want to quote laws and what has been heard in law, the Supreme Court ruled in Garmin that when an activity is arguably subject to the NLRA, states must defer to the National Labor Relations Board. Both the text of the NLRA and the NLRB and Supreme Court case law make clear that voluntary recognition is subject to the NLRA. During committee hearings, even the sponsor of the bill admitted that voluntary recognition is subject to NLRA. We can roll the tape back if you don't believe me. I was in that committee. Therefore, SB 362 is preempted by federal law. Further, SB 362 is preempted because it seeks to regulate private businesses' ability to provide employee contact information to the union. Both the NLRB and the Supreme Court have decided that during a union election, employers must disclose the contact information of all employees. Therefore, SB 362, contrary to what y'all have been hearing today, is preempted because it unlawfully interferes with the NLRB authority to conduct elections and enforce the NLRA. And when I asked the question, is it preempted? I think one of the answers we got in committee was, it's the governor's bill. That's what the governor said. That's what the governor's people said. Supreme Court says different. Federal law says different. And for context, let's talk about voluntary recognition. Companies prefer voluntary recognition because it means that workers not only benefit from a simpler and fairer process for forming a union, but it's also that business can avoid fighting costly anti-union campaigns against workers. And it happens. I told y'all, the intimidation happens. The union busting happens. And guess who has to pay for those union busting companies? The businesses. Voluntary recognition is the simplest way for an employer. It's the simplest way to prove that an employer, or to their employer, that the union has the support of the majority of workers in the workplace as a bargaining representative. That's what voluntary recognition does. Now, if we want to go into the election, the more time-consuming NLRB supervised election, the employers have forced an NLRB supervised election to show the majority support. But voluntary recognition instead allows an employer to recognize the union once a majority of workers have signed the cards authorizing the union to represent them. This is important because the election process is often the most contested part of forming a union and is time-consuming. And all too often, employers are waging these scorched earth campaigns against workers. They're engaging in legal activity like holding mandatory meetings, which we've heard. And it's designed to break up workers and convince them to change their vote, as well as illegal activity like firing organizers. That's retaliation for people trying to organize. This legislation is against federal law. I'm gonna say it again, because we keep hearing otherwise. This legislation is against federal law, federal labor laws. It attacks workers' protection, it hurts business owners, it makes Georgia a worse state to do business in. A union contract with good wages and benefits provides Georgians with middle-class security. We know improved job quality means easily attracting and attaining workers, and it's a win for employees and employers. But Senate Bill 362 would make it harder for businesses to bring their good union jobs to Georgia. It could even drive them to other states and not make incentive where incentives are not conditional. This legislation will cause our state to bleed money into litigation. Committing time and resources to defend SB 362 in court, gonna hurt businesses, may hinder some economic growth, and waste taxpayers' money, working taxpayers' money. Meanwhile, all our potential new jobs will travel to one of the other states where there is unions with decades of hard work. Building our economy and development machine is wasted. It isn't good business to tell business how to conduct employee relations. It isn't good business to strip employees of their rights. It isn't good business to add barriers to social mobility and prevent our middle working class from thriving. And finally, it isn't good business to subject Georgia to costly, priceless, possible litigation, and we should be focusing on attracting businesses that want to invest in Georgia, not driving those away, and not driving away businesses that want a unionized workforce. Mr. President, I yield the ball.
Thank you, Senator. You've got one question if you'd like to take it. You
Whose
know,
question?
it's the majority leader.
Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry.
Senator from the 51st.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the senator yield?
Yes.
Could you quickly read the fourth paragraph of your minority report, the last sentence? And then I have a couple quick questions if you'll take them.
I got me out of order, so hold on, give me a second. And I know I had it.
It's the last sentence of the fourth paragraph.
Last
Starts
sentence,
with
the minority believes the state should trust business owners, or where we talking?
Yes, ma'am, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So you've said you believe that the government should not tell businesses how to run their own business. Is that?
They should trust private
Correct.
business owners
So
to
can I ask you-
run their own.
Are you familiar with the Fair Labor Standards Act?
Not like verbatim, but what
So
piece
it
are you
sets
talking
minimum
about?
wages. It also sets the workforce,
Mhm.
the work week for 40 hours, so otherwise you have to pay overtime. Are you familiar with Executive Order 14026 that was signed by President Biden last year?
No.
It requires that all contractors who have federal contracts pay a minimum wage of $17.20 per hour. Are you familiar with that provision?
And I see where you're going with this, Mr. Leader.
Mhm.
But the fact remains here, and what we know, unionizing works, unionizing is strong, and unionizing is protected under federal law.
Would you, just a couple quick questions.
Go ahead, and I'm only saying that because you're spouting a
Are
bunch
you-
of things
are you
that I
familiar
haven't, I can't deny or disagree with
Just-
what you're
these
saying.
are simple. Most business people in the room are familiar. OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, DBE, Disadvantaged Business Enterprises. Are you familiar with that program? It's a federal program requiring federal contractors to give incentives for businesses who are owned by minorities such as women, blacks, Native Americans, and so forth. Didn't know if you're familiar with those. And I was going to ask you a final question. Do you support drug test requirements for bus drivers and truck drivers that are federally required tests for businesses?
Yes, I would. If it has to do with business safety, the safety of the business, and it's federally required, yes.
So your
Just
statement-
like this law is federally.
So your statement at the end
protected.
of your minority report truly doesn't mean without any restrictions at all. Just the way it reads, you support businesses to make their own decisions without government intrusion, but it sounds like you probably support these other programs that I've mentioned.
Leader, this entire bill supports state intrusion. Yes, it's intrusive of business. It's telling businesses what to do. So I guess I'm a little unclear. Yes, we support businesses. We support their right to choose, and they can choose to have union workers as well. They can choose voluntary authorization if they like. But this bill is saying that they cannot.
Just asking for clarification on your statement at the
Okay.
end. Thank you very much.
I don't see the conflict of the statement, but thank you, Mr. Leader.
Recognize Senator from the 14th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
Yes.
Senator, I know that you are as avid of an enjoyer of monitoring federal district court dockets as I am, and in
Love
that
it.
shared spirit, I just wanted to ask you,
Reading
is it
material
not
at night.
true that the case that the majority was referring to is NLRB versus Arizona, correct?
Correct.
And in that case, there was an Arizona constitutional amendment in which that amendment routed everybody towards secret ballots, kind of like this bill does, and that's correct, right?
The senator knows what he speaks.
And is it not true that the reason that the district court refused to rule on the preemption issue, or ruled that it could not determine if the bill was preempted by federal law, was because there might be some applications, number one, where the amendment could be used on employees that were not covered by the NLRA? Is that correct?
The senator knows what he speaks.
And is it not true that because there was no enforcement action in that case to actually tee up the question of whether somebody was harmed by the Arizona Constitutional Amendment, isn't it true that there's really been no court case that's actually tested these provisions under federal law to date, correct?
That would be correct,
All
Senator.
right, thanks, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. President, I yield the will.
All right. Senator has yielded. Recognize the gentleman from the 3rd to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, been a long day. I would add in closing debate that while we were having our very fine Chick-fil-A lunch over 2 hours ago, my phone rang and I answered it, and it was a gentleman from my district, a friend of mine who is the union rep of a major union local in my district. And he said, Mike, just wanted you to know that we read this bill. No biggie. Doesn't bother us, doesn't bother anything we do. He said, you know, in my experience in organizing, we always use a secret ballot because we believe it's the right thing to do. That's my district union rep. Colleagues, listen to me, please. There is nothing in this bill to stop anyone from organizing a union. Again, there is nothing in this bill to stop anyone from organizing a union, and no amount of rhetoric can change that fact. This bill simply deals with voluntary agreements between our state and our taxpayers and prospective employees seeking economic incentives from our state. Further, it protects the rights of hardworking Georgians. I urge your support and your favorable consideration. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Thank you, Senator. Is there objection to the previous question being ordered? Chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none. The main question is ordered. The question is on the passage of the bill. All those in favor vote yea. Opposed, nay. Secretary, unlock the machine. State your inquiry.
For workers.
I couldn't hear you, Senator.
I'm sorry,
What'd
we're
you
going to
say?
do that over. Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry.
I was saying a no vote on this bill is in support of workers.
Oh. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 31, the nays are 23. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. All right. Moving on to SB 410. Secretary, read the caption.
Senate Bill 410, a bill by Senator Kirkpatrick of the 32nd and others. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 2 of Article 3 of Chapter 50 of Title 43 of the OCGA relating to licensing of veterinarians and veterinary technicians generally, so as to exempt certain sterilization services performed by out-of-state veterinarians from licensing requirements and for other purposes. The Senate Committee on Regulated Industries and Utilities recommends that this bill do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Cowser of the 46th District Chairman. The Regulated Industries and Utilities Committee offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 410, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 2 of Article 3 of Chapter 50 of Title 43 of the OCGA relating to licensing of veterinarians and veterinary technicians generally, so as to exempt certain sterilization services provided by out-of-state veterinarians from licensing requirements, to provide for temporary licenses for out-of-state veterinarians and for other purposes. Senator Kirkpatrick of the 32nd and others offer the following amendment to amend the substitute to Senate Bill 410 by inserting agencies after adoption in line 147 and by replacing is with in line 152. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Senator from the 9th, do you have a parliamentary inquiry?
No, I don't this time. They can be louder. I ask for unanimous consent to excuse the senator from the 10th and the 5th.
The 10th and the 5th?
Yes.
Without objection, senators from the 10th and the 5th will be excused. Recognize the senator from the 32nd to speak to the bill and the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 410 is a bill that eases licensing restrictions in order to address workforce shortages in Georgia. We have a shortage of veterinarians in Georgia, especially in rural areas, that has impacted spay and neuter services. The demand is high and especially impacts local government, shelters, and nonprofit rescue organizations. Senate Bill 410 allows for a 6-month temporary license by endorsement for vets and vet techs licensed in other states for the purpose of remedying staffing shortages in shelter medicine and nonprofit spay-neuter clinics across Georgia, including government shelters. A growing number of vets pursue short-term relief work due to the flexibility of the work schedule, much like nurses and other healthcare professionals. The nonprofits that they work for must be licensed in Georgia. This is another effort to streamline licensure and fill a workforce need for our state, and I appreciate the Georgia Veterinary Medical Association and the Georgia Pet Coalition for working with me on this bill. The amendment corrects 2 Scrivener's errors, and I would urge your support for the amendment and the bill. Be happy to answer any questions.
You have no questions, Senator.
Thank you. I yield the will.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? Chair hears none. So we're going to take up the amendment. The question on is Amendment 1, authored by the dear lady from the 32nd, the author of the bill. Is there objection to Amendment 1? Without objection, Amendment 1 is added. Questions on the adoption of the committee substitute as amended. Is there objection to the adoption of the committee substitute as amended? Hearing none, the committee substitute is, as amended, is adopted. Is there objection to the agreements with the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none. The main question is ordered. The question is on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor of the bill will vote yea. Opposed, nay. Secretary, unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 52 and the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. All right, moving on. SB 406. Secretary, read the caption.
Senate Bill 406, a bill by Senator Dixon of the 45th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 10 of Chapter 3 of Title 38 of the OCGA relating to statewide first responder building mapping information system, so as to establish a grant program to fund the creation of school mapping data for inclusion in a statewide first responder building mapping information system, to provide standards for the school mapping data and for other purposes. The Senate Committee on Public Safety recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Alpers of the 56th District Chairman. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from the 45th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate colleagues, I bring before you Senate Bill 406. And what this bill does, it makes it standardizes and creates accurate maps for school floor plans. Currently, schools or public safety folks across all platforms are using either blueprints, so physical paper maps, or they may have like a zip drive that they're able to plug into their squad car. But a lot of times these maps are outdated and they're not updated when there's remodels done to schools or any additions that are added on to schools, and these maps are not updated. So when there is an emergency in the school, whatever it is, a lot of times you've got public safety folks coming in and they're essentially flying blind as they're trying to get to the emergency in the school, and it causes delays and could cost somebody their life. This bill, what it would do is it establishes school mapping standards modeled off the military, best practices from the military. And essentially what it is it's a digital map, and it's app-based, so there's no requirement to purchase software, or there won't be issues dealing with, if the police department and the sheriff department have different softwares that they use. This would be compatible across all platforms because it's app-based. And the other benefit to it is they'll be able to leave their squad car and have it on their phone or an iPad as they go into the school. And with it being digital, they would also be able to communicate with school administration, where the emergency is, and it's all live and updated as they enter the school. So if there's changes or if the emergency moves to another part of the school, they can be updated as they're trying to get to the emergency and handle whatever the issue is. And it's also more detailed. It's based off of what the military uses currently, and it's a grid system. There's also very, very detailed entrance and exits wherever the school is, also dealing with windows so they know the best place to enter and exit the school. And with that, Mr. President, be happy to answer any questions.
You do have one question, Senator. Senator from the 15th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
I do.
Senator, I want to commend you for bringing the bill. But one clarity, this is an update and another feature added as it relates to apps. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's no one specific vendor. There's over a dozen companies that create these maps. This bill does not mandate that you use one vendor over another. It would be an open market.
And that's a huge public safety issue.
It is, yes, sir.
Thank you.
You have no further questions, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield well.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? Chair hears none. Is there objection to the previous question being ordered? Chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there objection to agree to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none. The main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill. All those in favor vote yea. Opposed, nay. Secretary, unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 52 and the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Senate Bill 205. Secretary, read the caption.
Senate Bill 205, a bill by Senator Williams of the 25th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 3 of Article 1 of Chapter 18 of Title 43 of the OCGA relating to licenses for funeral directors and embalmers, so as to change certain provisions related to the reinstatement of a lapsed funeral director's license and for other purposes. The Senate Committee on Regulated Industries and Utilities recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Cowser of the 46th District Chairman. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Senator from the 25th. Senator from the 28th, state your inquiry.
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it okay that a funeral home director is bringing a funeral home director bill?
Oh. All I know is the senator from the
qualified.
All I know is the senator from the 25th is the last person to let you down. So.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a very simple bill. It's a very good bill. I appreciate your consideration, and I ask for your vote to pass this bill. Thank you.
Recognize the senator from the 14th. State your inquiry.
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. President.
State your inquiry.
Is it true the standard in question is whether a senator is immediately or particularly interested, and as we can see, he's neither immediately nor particularly interested in his bill?
Does any other senator wish to rise? Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? Chair hears none. Is there objections to the previous question being ordered? Chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none. The main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill. All those in favor of the bill vote yea. All opposed nay. Secretary, unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 52, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. All right, moving on. House Bill 166. Secretary, read the caption.
House Bill 166, a bill by Representative Methiak of the 74th and others. A bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 6 of Chapter 10 of Title 15 of the OCGA relating to constables, clerk, and other court personnel so as to provide for the qualification of constables and for other purposes. The Senate Committee on Judiciary recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Strickland of the 17th District Chairman. That completes the order, Mr. President.
All right, recognize the senator from the 17th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I'd start by, I'd like to recognize the whip of the Majority Caucus from the House is with us today as we start passing House bills and the Senate floor. He's ignoring me like he always does. That's okay. We have a little lawyer bill here that deals with constables, which probably none of y'all have ever heard of. There's apparently only one county in our state that has a constable, but they can assist by law magistrate court judges with some of their duties, including service of process. But the current law says they have to have the same qualifications as a magistrate court judge, and this simply changes the standard. It says exactly what we want when it comes to qualifications for a constable, to make sure that courts that want to take advantage of this can actually hire people for the job and help move cases a little bit faster. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. If not, I'll yield the well.
You do have a question. One lawyer to the other.
Yes,
Senator
sir.
from the 50th.
Yes, sir. Lawyer fight.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the senator yield?
Of course.
Could you go into a little bit more detail about what a constable is and what a constable does for us?
Yes, actually, I can, because I read it this morning when I saw this bill was on the agenda. And so a constable can do things such as they can assist a magistrate court judge. I know you want to be a judge one day, so you pay attention. They can assist a magistrate court judge with some of their duties, which include any duties that are defined by local law. So local law like your county could give you extra duties for your constable to work with you as a judge in Habersham County. Or they also can collect money for the magistrate court as well, money that's due for the court. And most importantly, they can serve papers, make sure people actually can get lawsuits served and move cases along in that court as well. Is that all you have?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator from the 28th, do you have a serious question? I do.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, do you yield?
Of course, yes, sir.
Can you tell me how many Constantinoples there are in the state of Georgia?
Only 3.
Thank you.
Senator, I believe you can yield at any point you want to.
I'll tell you one more if there is one. Okay,
I'll
yield the well.
Okay, all right. Well, here, Senator from the 56, he wants to ask you a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator, you're very knowledgeable about constables in the state of Georgia. I see you read up on it. Can you tell me in Georgia law whether they are elected or appointed, please?
They actually are appointed. They're appointed by the magistrate court judge.
Senator, are you sure that Georgia law only allows them to be appointed?
Yes, sir, I am.
Senator, you brought this bill in front of us. Are you really sure that's true?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, when you get back to your desk, I'll show you some reference.
Yeah. That kind of fell apart on you right there at the end.
It sure did.
With that, I'll yield the well.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? Chair hears none. Is there objection to the previous question being ordered? Chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none. The main question is ordered. Questions on the passes of the bill. Senator from the 20th, for what purpose do you rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
If the constable was serving papers on a commercial trucking company, would they serve the insurance company that represents the trucking company or the actual trucking company itself?
All those in favor of the bill vote yea. All opposed, nay. Secretary, unlock the machine. Senator from the 19th, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, I was just going to ask if it was too late for me to make a motion to table.
Oh. Yeah, it's always too late for you, Senator. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 51, the nays are 1. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. All right, we have one special action that we need to take up here, and then we'll be done for the day. Recognize the senator from the 20th.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate adopt the conference committee report on House Bill 557.
All right, Senator has moved that we adopt the conference committee report on 557. Secretary, read the caption.
Committee of Conference report on House Bill 557. The Committee of Conference on House Bill 557 recommends that both the Senate and the House of Representatives recede from their positions and the attached Committee of Conference substitute to House Bill 557 be adopted. Respectfully submitted, Senator Walker of the 20th and others. The Committee of Conference substitute to House Bill 557, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 34 of Title 43 of the OCGA relating to physicians, assistants, and others, so as to authorize physicians to delegate the authority of advanced practice registered nurses and physician assistants to prescribe certain Schedule II controlled substances and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Recognize the Senator from the 20th. Speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, the conference committee report on House Bill 557 was placed on your desk yesterday. I hope you took the time to review it. This is the result of really over a 3-year effort to change our law to help us with our healthcare workforce. It does 3 things. It expedites certain post-licensure processes for advanced nurses and PAs with the Composite Medical Board. It allows APRNs and PAs to provide adult patients a 5-day course of hydrocodone or pain medicine, certain Schedule II medications in an emergency. 48 other states allow this by their advanced nurses. And lastly, it allows PAs and APRNs to authorize a disability parking permit. I'll be happy to go into more detail. This body passed the language that's in this bill last session 53-1. The House passed it 173-2. When it was presented in committee, there was nobody signed up to testify against it. We've worked hard on this. This is a good measure. I'd ask for your favorable consideration. No questions, I'll yield the well.
You have no questions, Senator.
Thank you.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? Senator from the 32nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a member of the conference committee, I will vote green on this report, but there are a couple things I want to mention. The language that I noticed on my very recent re-review of this bill, I want to talk about lines 50 to 52 and 183 to 185, requiring continuing education for only 1 hour every other year for these new prescribers. For physicians who prescribe opioids, the requirement's 3 hours one time for the state and 8 hours for the DEA. Also, in the bill, we did not specifically address the requirement to report to the PDMP for these new prescribers. So in the middle of an opioid crisis, I believe we are going to need to work on this in the future, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. And with that, I yield the well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Do any other senator wish to speak for or against? Senator from the 20th, for what purpose do you rise? Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? Chair hears none. Question is on the adoption of the conference committee report, HB 557. All those in favor of adopting the conference committee report will vote yea. All opposed, nay. Secretary will unlock the machine. Senator from the 20th, for what purpose do you rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. President.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that I am committed to working with my good friend from the 32nd to address her concerns, but that she did sign the conference committee report?
Senator knows what he speaks.
Thank you.
On the motion, the yeas are 49, the nays are 3. This motion has prevailed, and the Senate has adopted the Conference Committee report on 557, House Bill 557. I recognize the Majority Leader for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Day 17 has come to a close. Therefore, I move that the Senate stand adjourned until 0900 on Friday, February the 9th.
The Majority Leader has moved. Secretary, read the announcements.
The Appropriations of Education and Higher Education Committee Subcommittee will meet upon adjournment in 307 of the CLOB. The Retirement Committee will meet upon adjournment in 310 of the CLOB. The Appropriations Economic Development Subcommittee will meet upon adjournment of the Retirement Committee in 310 of the CLOB, and the Appropriations Transportation Subcommittee will meet at 4 p.m. in 450. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Recognize the Senator from the 19th for... Is there any other announcements need to be made? Senator from the 19th, you come to the well. Any other announcements? Recognize the Senator from the 18th.
Yeah. Colleagues, just to remind you, tomorrow will be Blue Jeans Day in honor of our former members. So dress down, Blue Jeans Day. Crisply pressed.
Senator from the 19th, you have an announcement?
Just members, if you will look up there, you'll see that the Appropriations Subcommittee for Economic Development will meet upon adjournment of the Retirement Committee. The Retirement Committee will be first. We'll follow right behind them in room 310. Thank you for your help.
The Majority Leader has moved that we stand adjourned until 9 a.m. Friday, February 9th. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes clearly have it. We're adjourned.